Yo, what is up everybody? As usual, it's your boy Lahima here. Today we're going to be talking about a very controversial, subject, which is should you use sidechain compression on your 808s? I have seen so many tutorials about this, and I feel like no one ever goes super in depth on it to really diagnose and understand why you should or should not. So before we go ahead and get started, I'm going to leave some timestamps down below so that way you can skip to every part you need to, or the new YouTube timeline thing. A lot of introductory stuff is just going to be about compressors in general, so if you're already familiar with them, it's not going to be any new information. And with that being said, let's go ahead and hop in. So compression is a technique used to lower the dynamic range of a signal to something that is feasible. Signals with very large dynamic ranges often usually sound jarring or unpleasing, and also it makes it very difficult to actually know where they lie in the stereo image of your song, for example. But this is not the only use for compressors. Compressors actually have a multitude of uses, especially, and I would say more particularly, in the engineering world. In the engineering world, we call them DRAs. DRA stands for dynamic range attenuation, and as per the name, it lowers the dynamic range of a signal. So what can something like this actually be used for? Well, for a number of reasons. One particular use can be, for example, for circuit protection. For example, if you plug your synth into your wall jack, the wall jack will output a voltage of 120 volts. Your synth can maybe only take about from a range of 3.3 volts to 15 volts. When the signal comes in, if it's over that 15 volts, it's going to fry the circuit of the board. So DRAs are useful in these sort of situations because they can lower the dynamic range of the input voltage, for example, from the wall jack. I would say there is one key difference between DRAs and compressors, at least modern day compressors, and that is this idea of ADSR. ADSR stands for Attack, Decay, Sustained Release, and it basically represents how a sound fluctuates in volume over time. Attack represents how fast a sound fluctuates from negative infinity to its peak volume. And you always see that this happens first in a sound. Every sound will usually get its loudest first and then dwindle out to negative infinity. Decay represents how long it takes a sound to get from the attack stage, aka its true peak or its maximum volume, to the sustained stage where we see its average volume happen. And with that being said, the sustained stage represents the average volume of a signal, or its RMS. And just as a quick side note, usually when we refer to dB range, we're usually referring to the volume difference between the attack stage of a sound and the sustained stage of a sound. And then lastly, we have the release stage, which is how long it takes a sound to go from the sustained stage to complete silence or negative infinity. I know that was a lot. So let's go ahead and hop into Ableton and see a couple examples of just ADSR at work and how it pertains to 808s and our overall question. So what I've done is just made two almost identical saw leads, and the only difference between them is just the attack of both of them. So for the first saw lead, which is the blue one, I've just made the attack to be about 1 millisecond. And for the other saw lead, I've just made the attack to be about 1 second. And the reason for this is that I just want to show how the attack is critical to making something sound percussive versus not percussive. The quicker the attack, the more the signal actually will sound percussive. So let's hear it in action real quick. So as we expected, with the slow attack, it doesn't sound very percussive or have any sort of punch or oomph to it. Now let's listen to the one with the faster attack. And just as well, we see that the faster attack one sounds way more percussive or punchy. But now let's take a peek and see how using one identical compressor in both these two signals will yield very different results. So what I've gone ahead and done is just render them both out into audio just to make it a little bit easier to see which one is which. And what I've also done is just put one compressor on each of them with identical settings. As you can see here, this is the high attack one, and here you can see all the settings. I want to go over to the low attack one. You can see that they're basically identical. The only thing I've changed is just the makeup gain, just to make sure they're both bouncing at around -7 decibels. So now let's start off by listening to the low attack one. Let's take a note of a couple things. The first thing to note was that the attack of the compressor we're using was at 1 second. And as we saw in the synth, the attack of our sound actually occurs at 1 second. And so we need to keep this in mind when we're using the other compressor on the high or faster attack synth, that we need to probably set the attack of it to be identical to its actual attack that it has as its own ADSR. But just to begin with, we'll leave it at 1 second just to see how it acts. So here's the high attack one, and now let's actually see how the compressor interacts with the signal. So the first thing we see is that the compressor is acting almost the same. It's doing about 5 dB of gain reduction, and the signal output is about -7 dB as well, which is basically what we expected. But there is one clear difference, and that's that the attack of the compressor is not actually the attack of the signal. The attack of the compressor is at 1 second, but we know the actual attack of the signal occurs at 1 millisecond. So let's set the attack of the compressor to be the proper 1 millisecond, and let's see how much gain reduction occurs. And boom, we see a huge change occur. Now we're going to get about 10 dBs of gain reduction. So why is it important to understand ADSR when it comes to sidechain compression 808s? Depending on the ADSR of the sound, that's going to influence the ADSR of the compressor. In our case, since we're going to be using sidechain compression on our 808, it's almost going to be changing the ADSR of our 808. But before we talk about that, let's talk a little bit actually kind of what sidechain compression is. So sidechain compression is borderline identical to normal compression. The only difference is that what we use to trigger the threshold is something that's distinct from actually what we're attenuating. So let's look at a quick example. So what I've done is just added a kick drum, and then I'm going to be using that kick drum as the input source for the sidechain compression. So what's going to happen is that when the kick drum plays, the slow saw lead is actually going to lower in volume slightly. And like I said, that's essentially sidechain compression. It's pretty easy. So now that we've done all our homework, we can finally answer the question, should you sidechain your 808s to your kick? And the answer is, it depends on 2 core factors. The first one is, well, does your 808 actually have kind of a percussive element to it? For example, maybe like a kick layered on top, or maybe even like a pitch envelope that's super common with pretty much every 808. And the second thing is, if it does, are you willing to lose that percussive element of it just to have a cleaner mix? So it's pretty much kind of like a push and pull. If you sidechain your 808 to your kick drum, you're going to get a cleaner low end, but in exchange what you're losing is the percussiveness of the 808, so in short it's going to hit less hard. But why is that? Well, let's look at a quick example to actually see. So what I've done real quick is just loaded up an 808 and the same exact kick we had before, and I'm using, as you would expect, the kick as the input source of the compressor. So I'm going to set the compressor to do about -5 to -10 dBs of gain reduction on the 808. And I've set the attack to be as fast as possible because, as we know with the kick, the transient of the kick pretty much happens instantaneously, and we want to be able to use that as what triggers the compressor. So what I'm going to do now is just render it out. And so immediately we see something very weird about the 808 when you render it out after it's been sidechained. You see that the whole transient portion we had here is completely gone. And this is what I mean by 808s will hit less hard, because literally what you're doing is you're getting rid of the attack stage of the sound. But in exchange, we can hit the kick a lot more clearly now. So that's what I'm saying. It's kind of a push or a pull. Which one do you want more? But in my opinion, I think there's even a better solution to get a kind of a good kick sub dynamic going on. And it's actually really simple. Instead of thinking about handling the issue in the time domain or kind of on a dynamic level, we can think about handling the same issue on a frequency domain. And I think that's really the better option, because by handling it with something like, for instance, multi-band compression or more preferred EQ, we can still keep the dynamics of the 808 and the kick and also make sure they don't clash together. So let's do that. So generally the first thing I do is that when I choose my 808 and my kick, I make sure the fundamentals are not exactly the same. So for example, if we look at the fundamental of my 808, it's sitting at about 30 Hertz. And if we look at the fundamental of my kick, we'll see it's about 40 Hertz. So just from the offset, we'll already see that this kick and 808 will go really well together because their fundamentals are in 2 distinct areas. And that's good because when we actually EQ it, we can notch out where the fundamental of the kick from the 808 and vice versa so that they mix well together. So let's do that. So what I'm going to do is just go to the kick, grab a little notch filter, make it pretty small, go to about 30 Hertz, and then throw a notch down. And then do the same thing with the 808, grab the same notch filter, make it pretty small, go to about 40 Hertz, and then throw another notch. Just 1 or 2 dB is enough. And then when we play them together, you'll see that we'll be able to hear both of them equally and fine. And that's what I mean. Sidechain compression, although can work, but I feel like EQ is definitely a better approach to the same problem. But keep in mind, this is only for percussive 808s. If you're dealing with different types of basses, sidechain compression I would actually say is a better option. Example, like with the Reese bass or any other sort of bass where it has no attack and it's just a sustained note. Since there's no attack anyways, when you sidechain compress, you're basically not going to be losing anything. But anyways guys, that's pretty much it for the video today. I know this one was a longer one than normal. Next we're going to go back to normal. But I just want to say, if you guys like these sort of videos, if you guys like more tutorial based stuff, let me know in the comments down below. I definitely want to know, and I want to hear you guys out and see what you guys actually want as a community. So if you haven't already, go to make sure to hit that like button, hit the bell button, and also hit that subscribe button so that we can stay notified when I post new stuff. Also, gonna make sure to follow my Instagram at Lahima Beats. I post cool content all the time, like gear reviews and just stuff I'm working on. And lastly, and most importantly, I appreciate you guys watching the video, and I will see you guys next time. Lahima out.